Most developers build simple apps where data just lives temporarily in state. Maybe a form here, a list there, and that's it. But as soon as you try to build something real, like an app where users can create events, share them with others, and collect RSVPs, things get complicated fast. Now you're dealing with databases, unique links, real user interactions, and making sure everything is saved and synced correctly. And if you don't structure it properly, your app can quickly become messy, hard to scale, and difficult to maintain. That's exactly why in this video, we're gonna build a complete production-ready event planner application from scratch. Users will be able to create events, generate shareable links, send them to friends, and have those friends RSVP in real time. All of this data will be stored in a fully managed Postgres database using Neon, giving us a scalable and modern backend without really dealing with the complex infrastructure. We're also going to build everything using a modern full stack setup, structure our data properly, and then deploy the entire application so it's live on the internet for everyone to use. By the end of this video, you will feel comfortable with a modern tech stack that includes Next.js, TypeScript, Tailwind CSS, and more. You won't just have built a cool project, you'll understand how to design, build, and deploy real-world applications that people can actually use. Now, before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. And now that we're done with it, let's get into it. Okay, everyone, now let's get started with the project. So, to start off with the project, I have a folder here open for the project directory, and I opened it inside of VS Code. The first thing we need to do is set up our Next.js application. Create Next App. I'm gonna install the latest version, and you can see that first it asks us to give a name for our project. I'm just gonna put a dot because it's gonna create a project at the root of our folder, and I'm gonna use the recommended settings. Now we have created our project here on the app folder. To run our project, I'm gonna run npm run dev. And this should open up the project on localhost 3000 with the boilerplate version of the application. Now, the first thing we wanna do is just set up the layout for our app. That's gonna include some UI that exists for the navbar, and also the overall structure of the color palette, the theme, and all of those things. Now, as usual with my tutorials, and you'll see this as I believe will be helpful for you, I don't like to spend a lot of time doing styling, just because if this is not the focus of the tutorial, which I don't think this is for this one, I don't want to spend a lot of time to make the video super long. So I'll paste here the default colors that we're going to be using in this project, and you can just copy and paste from the code in the description, which I give to you guys fully for free. So these are the colors that we're going to be using. And also what I want us to do is I want us to go to the layout, and in the layout, I want to restructure this a bit, because for the body here, we render all of our routes right at the start, right? If I go to our app, our page.tsx, we're going to delete everything that is here. Just call this the home page, and we're going to pretty much delete everything. Now on the layout, what I want to do is I want to set up a header right below the body. So it's going to be a header that is going to wrap around our children, and it's going to kind of act as the navbar. So actually, let's put this outside here, and I'll put a div with a link. Now this link is going to come from next link, and it's going to serve as our navigation link for our logo. So we have no logo for this project. I'm just going to call it event planner. But if you want, you could put an image in here as the logo for the project. And when people click on it, it will take them to a specific route. Now, which route are they going to be brought to? Well, we're going to make that be the home route. So this is how it looks right now. If I click on this, it should take me back, but I'm already in that route, so it doesn't really matter. Now, the next thing is I want to set up a nav route right below this. The nav is where the links exist, and the main link that we're gonna have is gonna be one to the dashboard. The dashboard is gonna be the main section where users can create the events that they want to invite people to. So we don't have that yet, but it's gonna be a route called /dashboard, and it's gonna exist over here. Now we're gonna update the styles in a second, but for now that should be good to go. Now, what styles do we want? Well, first things first. For the body over here, I'm gonna replace this with the following styles. We're just gonna make the entire body, the entire page have a minimum height of full, display of flex, flex column, and set on the background and text colors that we defined in our CSS file. The next thing is I wanna set the header to have the following structure. I wanted to have a border at the bottom, have this grayish color, and have a backdrop blur, which kind of gives it a glassy look. Now, we can't scroll yet because there's nothing in the page, but you'll see when we're done with this that we can. Now, the next thing is this div. Now, on this div, I want to put here a margin X of auto, display flex, and then the important part is the justify between. Because what it's going to do is it's going to get the two different parts or two different elements inside of here, which in this case is going to be the link and this whole nav, and it's going to put a space in between them and align them to the edges. So if we were to, for example, put something else here, you'll see that now there's a space equally spaced out between all of them. But because there's only two of them, it makes it perfect such that the logo is on the left and the rest of the links are going to be on the right. Now, obviously, this dashboard link doesn't work. It shouldn't show up unless you're authenticated, but we're not there yet. Now, the next thing I want to do is just update the logo over here, make it a little bit bigger, have a bold color, and so on. Then we also want to set the different links by adding a display flex and item center. We only have one link right now, but we're going to add a section in here, which is going to show us, allow the user to press on their profile image and then select information about them. Now, that's all going to come when we integrate Neon Auth. So just wait until that happens. Now, the next thing we want to do is come down here to below our header, and we're going to wrap around our main content, right? Which is all of the routes in our application with a main tag. Now, immediately you see that something shows up here. There's some color structure here, but what we want to do is we want to set the class names of the main tag to have a margin X of auto, so everything is centered, a display flex with a width of full and a max width of 6L, and also a flex of 1 and a flex column with some padding around it. So you can clearly see this. Now, why is there a black rectangle in the middle of the screen? I'm sorry, but that's just because it's some leftover UI from the previous, from the boilerplate code. In fact, if I delete this, you'll see that it looks a lot more stylish now, because the structure of how we set this up is that we have the color in our globals.css, which is kind of like a background image with this radiant color with purple around it. Now, I realized that in all of my projects, I never use purple. So I wanted to use for this one, and it does look good in my opinion. Now, the next thing I want to do is we're pretty much done with setting up the layout. I want to start setting up authentication. Now, the setting up authentication is extremely easy with what we're going to be using in this video. However, it depends on what your database is. Now, the database we're going to be using for this video, we're going to be using PostgreSQL, and we're going to be using Neon to serve that database. Now, I want you guys to go and click the link in the description to get access to Neon, and it's completely free. What I want you guys to do is sign up for an account. I already have one, so I'm just going to log in. And when you set up, you're able to see your dashboard. Now, these are all the projects that I've built so far, and you can click on New Project. You're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Advent Planner App. And you can choose the version of PostgreSQL that you want. Now, right now, I'm going to use 17, but they have a preview for version 18. And I'm going to choose the cloud service provider to be AWS. I find AWS to be a lot more reliable, not in Neon necessarily, but in my opinion, everywhere else than Azure. Now, you can choose where you want to put. I am in your Oregon, so I'm just going to choose that, but it has to be closest to actually where your application is going to be mostly used. So if you're building a project for someone in another country, put it closer to that country. Then here's the important part. Neon is not just a database. Neon provides you a lot of different services. One of the best things that they do is that they provide Neon Auth, which is going to be a easily accessible Neon authentication by utilizing Better Auth, which in my opinion is already the best option out there for authentication. Now, the way you do this is we just created our project here. You see Event Planner App, which created our database super quick. We have no tables right now, but that's fine. We don't need to create a table for users or anything like that. It's all going to be done through here. However, we also need to connect to Neon. So how are we going to do that? To set up authentication and to set up the Neon table, what I want to do is first, we're going to be using an ORM to interact with our database tables. Now, what is an ORM? Well, an ORM is a way for us to easily communicate with our SQL tables without actually having to write SQL. Now, the ORM we're going to be using is Prisma, one of the biggest ones out there. And in order for us to set up Prisma and at the same time set up our Neon table to be connected to our project, we're going to go here to the Prisma Postgres documentation. So we're going to copy this command over here. We're going to open up our terminal and I'm going to paste this. We're going to install Prisma, its types, and also the Prisma client package. Now, what Prisma is going to do is it's going to allow us to write SQL, but instead of writing SQL in SQL, we're going to actually write it in TypeScript. So Prisma client is a way for us to generate type definitions for our different tables and their structures. Now, to set this up in our project, we're going to be using the Prisma init to use the Prisma CLI. Now, if you've never run this before, it's going to ask you to install. But if you have, it's just going to initialize our Prisma in our project. Now, what is Prisma going to look like in our project? Well, first of all, it's going to have here a prisma.config.ts as per the latest version of Prisma. It also created this .env file, which includes a database URL with a huge URL, but that's just not the URL for our table. That's just the one that comes with the command. We're going to have to replace this with the one that Neon gives us. And also a folder called Prisma with a file called schema.prisma. So when we set up our tables, we're going to write them down, define what each column is and what the type is inside of here. It's going to make it super simple for both our code and our database that is going to be hosted in Neon to know how each other are structured. So that's the main purpose for us to do Prisma. Now, I'm going to come back here to Neon and I'm going to click on connect. This is going to give us the connection string. The connection string will allow us to connect our local project here with our Neon database. So I'm going to delete all this and I'm just going to paste that connection string over here. Don't use mine because I'll shut down this project right after I'm done recording this video. Perfect. We now set up our initial connection to Prisma. However, there's one thing. We haven't set up authentication yet. Now, with authentication, we don't really need to do anything related to Prisma. I just set it up right here because I wanted us to have a connection to Neon. However, we're not going to do any Prisma stuff yet. What we're going to do instead is we're going to set up the Neon Auth by coming over here, and there's an Auth section at the bottom. Now in here, we're going to see that there is a users tab and a configuration tab. Now what we want to do is we're going to start by coming over here and going to our env file. And I'm going to add here a Neon Auth base URL. Now, what is going to be that URL? Well, it's going to be this auth URL that we get from the configuration. I'm going to paste it right here. We should be good to go. Now, the next thing we want to do is we're going to actually go to the Neon documentation. The Neon Auth documentation is very thorough and it shows us how to set up Neon Auth in our project. So we're going to actually just ignore some of it because we already have our project set up, but we're going to copy this command over here. npm install neon database auth latest. So I'm going to run that. It's going to install the latest version of neon database auth. I'm also going to come over here and we're going to copy this neon auth cookie secret. Now, what is a cookie secret? Well, because we're using Next.js, we need to set up a cookie over here. I'm also gonna just wrap this around with quotation marks and I'll put this over here as well. Now, it's nothing that we get from Neon. It's just a secret of random characters and numbers that we can generate ourselves. In fact, I can easily generate a secure cookie secret by running the OpenSSL command inside of my terminal. So I'm going to run this. It's going to generate a cookie secret you can copy and we can paste it over here. Perfect. Now, the next thing we need to do is set up our auth server instance. It tells us to do it in the lib auth server file. So I'm going to come here into our project and I'm going to create a lib folder where inside of it, I'm going to create another folder called auth. And in here, we're going to put all of the necessary files related to auth. The first one is going to be a client file, and the second one is going to be a server file. Now, why did we make a server and a client file? Well, if you're familiar with Next.js, by the way, I wrote server wrong. If you're familiar with Next.js, you know that there are going to be parts of Next.js where you're going to be writing client-side code and parts of it where you're going to be writing server-side code. Now, you need to have access to authentication information on both of them, right? Because sometimes you're in a client component and you might need to know if the user is authenticated. So in that case, we're going to do something. And in the other case, for the server, we're going to do something else. Now for the server one, here's what they recommend. We copy this snippet, we come over here, and we can paste this. Now, the second thing I want to do is I actually want to create a helper function that we're going to be using throughout our app, which allows us to quickly access the information of whether or not the user is authenticated or not. Now, this auth constant that we get back here from the create neon auth function gives us full access to the user, the current user logged in, and their information related to auth. So that means that I can easily make a function, for example, called get session, which when called is going to return the session of the user currently signed in. So I'm just going to return auth.getSession so that we don't need to keep calling auth or importing auth. We just import this function. Great. Now for the client version, it's a bit different. What we want to do is we want to import the create auth client from the neon database /auth/next. Now this is a client file and it will be used in client components. So I do need to make it into a client side file by importing or just using the use client tag at the top. Then I'm going to export const auth client, set it equal to create auth client, and that should be enough for us to have a client-side accessible auth client function. Now we're almost there. In the docs, you see that they actually give us access to a bunch of components and stuff that we can use throughout our application. Now those components already have UI on them. If you've ever used Better Auth before, you'll know that it comes with a lot of really nice looking UI components that we can just reuse without having to write our UI ourselves. So that's going to save us so much time. And the way you get this is first, we go here to our layouts.tsx. One of the things that they recommend is to suppress the hydration warning. That's just because hydration warnings appear all the time in Next.js, and because of some of the UI stuff that they have, it recommends that we just remove them because it's kind of annoying. The second thing is for us to set up Neon Auth UI provider. So I'm going to come here to our layouts and I'm going to import over here at the top the Neon Auth UI provider library. Now I'm going to wrap around our app right below the body, but around the header still with the Neon Auth UI provider. And I'm going to close it here. Just copy that, paste it here. And then what this is going to do is it's going to give us access to all of those components and stuff that we can use, but also the styles that we can use. So what I want to do is we're going to import the auth client that we just created from the client file, and we're going to pass it directly here into our Neon Auth UI provider through the auth client. And that's pretty much it. Now there's other confirmations, there's other things that we can add to our Neon Auth UI provider. But for now, we're just going to keep it like this. Now, sometimes this will give us an error of type mismatch. That's because the package is still in alpha. Or let me check. I think it might be still in beta. Yeah, it's in beta. In that case, there's no issue. I'm just going to put an as any over here. It's not going to really affect anything. And the next thing we want to do is we want to render the components, the UI components that are going to help us set up authentication. Now, the first actually super helpful UI component that we can render, this is actually super cool. If you go here to the localhost, I'm going to refresh this. There's one link that we haven't added. Now that link is going to be the user button. The user button is going to be a component that we're going to import over here. And it literally looks like this. So of course, it's not perfect right now because we haven't added a very crucial part of integrating UI components in Neon, but it is fully functional. I can click on it and I can see like links to the user's accounts, sign in and sign up. And also if when the user signs in, this will automatically show information about the user who signed in. Now, the reason why we're not seeing anything here, like it looks really ugly, is just because we haven't imported the styles for the Neon Auth components. So what I want to do is I'm going to come here to our globals.scss and we're going to come over here again. And it tells us, as you can see, to go to our Tailwind file and import this at the top. This is going to apply the styles for our project. Now, sometimes you might need to kill it and then like run it again, just because the styles might not be applying yet. But also, one of the things we have to do is I want to specify over here on the user button that the size that I want is going to be the icon size. Now, as you can see, it's going to become a lot smaller and have the correct styles. And I can move along and go to each type of, like each part of the authentication process. Now you see, it takes me to an auth page, auth/signup and auth/signin. Why is it taking me there? That's because that's how we set up authentication by using Neon Auth. What we want to do is we want to create an auth folder in our app over here. This auth folder is going to have a single route, which we're going to actually make it into a dynamic route with a variable called path. Now, inside of here, we're just going to make a page.tsx, and the dynamic route for path is because this is going to apply for both the sign in and sign up page. Now, as you can see from their docs over here, they have different ways to set this up. Now, the best way is to just copy this, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to paste it. Now, what this is going to do is if I come back here, it's going to render this sign in UI and also the sign up UI for both the sign in and sign up routes. Now, why did it need the path? Well, because it uses the path from the parent to determine what to show. And it uses this Neon Auth UI component called Auth View to render this thing over here. Now, one of the cool things about this is that there's more that you can do. For example, if you go here to the docs, you can actually see they have a bunch of different options that you can put to the Neon Auth UI provider. For example, you could make it into a UI provider that requires the user to have an email OTP. Now, what this does is it allows you to sign in with just an email code. Just by adding that prop, it already shows up over here. Now, the next thing that we could do as well is, for example, add credentials here, forget password. So that's an option that we can put. Instead of having email OTP, we can add that. And then it, while signing in, actually, it should add this forgot passwords functionality over here. Now, I want to keep it simple. I'm going to remove those. We're just going to keep it like this. However, that's super easy to add if you do want to do it. Now, all that it takes for us is to actually create an account. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to create an account. I'm going to call it pedro@gmail.com. I do realize I put that on the name field, so that's my mistake, but I'm going to create here Pedro. Password is going to be password123. Let me see if this is, yeah. And then I'm going to click on create account. Now, straight up, it says HTTP 404 not found. Now, one of the great things is that it threw a snack bar for us. That's part of the UI that we have set up. Now, it might be one of the issues that are showing over here, but because we're doing a server-side operation, it might also be the fact that we have to set up an API route for our auth. So this is the page for the auth, but we also want to create here a route called auth that is going to take in a dynamic parameter, which is going to be the path. And inside of it, we're going to have a route.ts. Now, what do we want to put on this route? Well, literally all we want to put is this. We want to import the auth client, not the client, but the auth server that we created from our libauth server file, this one over here. And we want to implement it and export all of the different endpoints through an auth handler. This is actually going to allow us to create an account. So let me try it again. I'll put here Pedro, put the email here, pedro@gmail.com, and then password123. Perfect. Create account, and boom, we created our accounts. Now, how do I know we created our accounts? First of all, this already shows the account of the user signed in. We don't even have to deal with that. But also, if I go here to our table, it shows all of your users or recent signups that we can see in our auth provider. Perfect. So that's how we set up authentication, and it's super simple. Now, one of the things I want to do right off the bat is set up the infrastructure for us to prevent a user from going to the dashboard page if they're not authenticated. Now, what does that mean? It means that, let me sign out over here. So we're not there anymore. But if I go to the dashboard here, I still can, right? Even though there's no page for dashboard, which by the way, I can just create one. So I'll create here a folder. Let's call it dashboard. Let me see, folder, dashboard. And inside of the dashboard folder, we're going to create a page.tsx. And we're going to export default function, call it dashboard page. and I'm just going to return a div saying dashboard. Perfect. Now we at least see this over here. Now what I want to do is I want to check to see the user authentication state and not allow them to go to the dashboard if that's the case. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to come back here and we're going to create a proxy file. Now, a proxy file is, if you're familiar with old Next.js, it's your middleware. It's basically going to be a function which is going to run in between every request. And that means that when you navigate to a new route, it is going to actually check to see if something matches the condition that you put. So like, for example, if the user is authenticated, and decide if they should let the user go in through that request or not. So we do have access to the request by accessing the next request. And inside of here, we want to make a couple assumptions. So first of all, we want to get the auth state of the user. So I'm going to say const auth, and then I'm going to actually use a different kind of import. I'm going to import directly over here the @/lib/auth/server, and I'm going to get the auth that we created over here. Then I'm going to use that auth to return an auth.middleware, which is a function from NeonAuth that allows us to determine where the user goes when they fail the auth check and which routes should be dependent on actually having that check be made. Now I'm going to put the login URL over here to be /auth/signin. That's where we want to go. And I have to wrap it around the request. Perfect. So you see that if I go to the dashboard, it doesn't actually allow me to do that because the user is not logged in. Now let's log in into our accounts again, pedro@gmail.com. And I'm going to put here password 123, log in. Perfect. Now we are in our page. Now it's time for us to build our dashboard. Now the dashboard is the main entry point of our app. However, it actually behaves as kind of just a HubSpot where we're going to have a lot of backend logic here. We're using our database to allow users to create an event that they want to invite people to. So there's going to be some logic in there, some logic in having users go ahead and try to RSVP to it. And to do all of that, we have to first set up the infrastructure for us to even do that. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to our schema.prisma, and I want to write our first table. Now tables in Prisma are represented as models, and we're going to have 4 different models. The first model is going to be for an event. So a user can create an event and they can invite their friends and whatever, right? Now, an event is going to have the following types. An event is going to have an ID. Now, an ID in Prisma, if you're not familiar with Prisma, I highly recommend checking out my Prisma tutorial where I go over everything. But basically, we just define the types here as string. ID is a bit different from other ones where we have to add this decorator here to say it's an ID. It defaults to a UUID, and this is the type. Then we want to know who is the owner of this event. So who created this event? So I'm going to create a type here called owner user ID. And I'm going to be adding a map here. However, you'll see why later on. Now, the next thing we want to do is add a title, a description, and a location for the event. So those are self-explanatory. It's just where it's going to happen, what is the event, and what is the title of it. Now we're going to add an event date, which is the time in which the event is going to happen. And we utilize this type over here called db.timestamps with a Z at the end. And we also put a default value 6. Then with all tables, I like to have a created at and updated at field, which does defaults, at least when you create your event, it's going to default to right now, right? The latest time that it was created was the moment you added, and the latest time it was updated was the moment you added as well. If we do make an update to the event, it's going to change the updated ads. Then finally, I want to add 2 more things. Now these are specific for PostgreSQL and specifically for Prisma, it's important. We're going to create an index on this table, an index on the owner user ID. This is going to make lookups on this table based on the owner user ID way more efficient and faster. I always recommend putting index for stuff that you're going to constantly be using to query information. And we're going to map this table to be called events. Now, the map over here, it's basically going to change the name of the table. Instead of us having to call this table event, we're just going to access the events table. Since technically, this is a model of one event, and this is just the name of the table. It's going to have multiple events. Perfect. Now, I'm going to create the other tables as well, all at the same time. Why? Because I feel like they all are very interconnected. Just one of them, which is going to be the table related to user subscriptions, we're going to leave it for later when we do implement subscription. Now, the event invite is going to be what we're inviting a user for. Now, what it needs is it needs an ID. It needs an event ID, which is going to reference the event table up here to know which event you're inviting people to. It needs a unique token. And this is going to be super important because if you watch the demo, the way we invite this is we actually send a link to people with the like a specific link for this event. And then they can go on, they don't need to create an account, and they can RSVP to an event. Then we're going to add a created at. I'm not going to add an updated at here because we're never going to update an event invite. We're just going to create them. And I'm going to map the table to be called event underscore invites. Now, I created here a relationship between the event invite table with this event ID and the event. Now, the way we establish this relationship is I want to come down here and reference the full event by giving it a type of event and setting the relation to be defined by the following fields. So the event ID field from this table, so references the ID field from the event table, right? Because that's the event ID. And this creates the relationship. But also we can add an on delete policy, which basically means that since the event invite depends on the event, when the event is deleted, we should probably delete the event invite that relates to it, right? It's kind of like when you have a project, a website that a user creates an account and they have a bunch of data on the website related to that account. If the user deletes their account, wouldn't it make sense to delete all of their data on other tables? That's why we put the onDelete policy as cascade. It cascades whenever the parent gets deleted. Now, why is it giving us red squiggly lines? That's because we have to finalize the establishment of the relationship up here by setting up the relationship on the other side, right? The same way how an event invite has one event that it's the invite for. An event can have multiple invites. So it's going to be here an event invite question mark because it's optional as well. Maybe you don't want to invite people. I don't know. But yeah. Now, the last table that we're going to make right now is going to be the end of this struggle, this process where you create an event, you invite people, and then people RSVP to that event. Now, how is this data going to be structured? Well, we're going to have an ID first. I don't know why it keeps going, creating such a gap. Then we're going to have an event ID where it is going to be of type string. It's going to map to a field called event ID, which, by the way, I didn't explain this up here, but when we map something, it basically changes the name of the column, right? So we call it like this when we're creating the model, but in the actual table in the database is going to be called this. So you can actually have different types in TypeScript versus what it's actually called in database. That's what mapping does. And that's why we do it with some of them and not with others. Columns that don't have two words to them, we don't do it because there's no purpose in it. But there's a clear distinction between the way we write our syntax, right, with underscores versus something like camel case, which is what we do over here. Now, the next thing is we're going to do invite ID. Invite ID establishes a double relationship, right? Where an RSVP to an event needs to have an event in which it is RSVPing and also an invite to which it's RSVPing, right? Those two things. Now, when a user RSVPs, we need to know their name, we need to know their email, and we also need to know their email normalized. Now, I'll show you guys why this even matters later on, but it's cool that we can actually run functions in Postgres to lowercase the email, just in case people put emails that aren't lowercase. Now, next thing we need is the status. So what is the user RSVPing as? They could RSVP as multiple different things. They can say they're going, they're not going, or maybe they're going. So that's a great use case for us to use an enum. I'm going to put here RSVP status, and I'm going to set it to be going as one of the options, maybe as the other, and not going as one of them as well. Then on the status down here, we're going to give it a type of RSVP status. Finally, I want to know 3 different timestamps. I want to know when they RSVP'd, so responded at, created at, and updated at. Finally, I want to establish a couple extra stuff here. Like for example, I want to create an index for quick lookups like we did up here. And I'm also going to change the name of the table from event RSVP like this to actually be event underscore RSVP. But we're also going to do something interesting here. I want to actually set up a unique relationship between the normalized email and the event ID, meaning that a user can only RSVP to the event once. This is to prevent duplicates, and also this is why we normalize the email. I know it sounds a bit stupid. We have 2 email fields, and what are the chances that 2 users put the same email but throw a random capital letter in the middle of it? Well, we're just doing it in a way that it's going to make it more secure, and you can actually prevent duplicate emails and duplicate RSVPs by having it like this. Perfect. Now we're pretty much done with our tables. Now, what do we do? Well, I want to send the structure of this table, or to this tables or this database, into our Neon database. If I go here to tables, you see there's no tables here. Now to do that, I'm going to create a migration. Now a migration can happen in Prisma by running the following command: npx prisma migrate, and then dev, because this is a dev environment, and we're going to give a name to this migration. Because it's the first one we're creating, I'm going to call it init. I'm going to run this, and right off the bat, when this is done, you're going to see that when I refresh this page, nothing will happen because there was an error. Let's see, migration failed to apply. New migrations cannot be applied before the error is recovered from. Cannot use column reference in default expression. Oh, I get the error. So let me actually go over here, and then I can actually remove this default value, and then we'll just lowercase it whenever we pass in that value. Perfect. Let me actually then run it here. Migration fix email. We're going to run this. It should run the second migration, and we get this error. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete here the migrations, and I'm going to delete the tables that we created. So as you can see, the whole purpose of why we're doing this is that they are all, it's sending our tables into the actual Neon database. And what I'm going to do is, so we have correctly removed the default value here. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to run the init one again. So we're going to run that. Hopefully it's going to work. And I think it worked. So I just ran npx prisma migrate reset. So you need to run that. And then we should have resetted our table. Sorry about that. Now to run the migration again, I'm going to come here and I'm going to run npx prisma migrate dev name init. Hopefully it is going to run the migration, because this has actually never happened to me. I've never had run into this mistake, but yeah, it seems to have worked. We have all the tables here, and the migration history is working. So all the tables we created by code now show up over here, and we can start writing them. Okay, perfect. Now that we have the tables ready, we can start setting up the dashboard page. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to dashboard. Now in the dashboard page, we're actually going to be accessing those tables, and to do that we have to generate the TypeScript types for them. Now to generate the types, we're going to run npx prisma generate. This will run through our models and generate a Prisma client, which will give us the types that we need to use. Then we're going to come here to our lib folder, and I'm going to create a prisma.ts. Then I'm going to copy this piece of code from the documentation. And this piece of code basically lets us generate a Prisma instance through this variable over here, but it gets a Prisma client. Now you can have a Prisma client in multiple places. All of our types are being generated into this folder called generated. Now you don't need to touch it. It'll just be here. We're going to import this from the @/app/generated/Prisma and then client. And then we're going to have access to the Prisma client. Now, the next thing we want to do is we're actually going to separate the UI from this page with the actual component that renders it. We're going to create a component called dashboard content. So dashboard content. This component is going to require a user ID. Now, the user ID we're going to get is going to be from the user who is logged in. Now, what we want to do is we want to utilize that function, the get session. So I'm going to say actually session is equal to await get session from the helper function we created. We need to make this into an async function to make this work. And then when we get back the session, I'm going to put here session.data.user.id. That will give us the ID of the user. Now, what is dashboard content? Well, this is going to be a component we're going to create on a components folder. So I'm going to create here a folder called components. And in here, I'm going to create our first component. It's going to be called dashboard content. I should have put a dash there, content.tsx. Now, in this component, we're going to export an async function called dashboard content. Now, in this async function, we're going to require a user ID, which is going to be of type user ID string, and we're going to return some UI. Now we can go back here, import this, and we should write our content inside of here. Now I'm going to close this up a bit so that now we can see what we're rendering on the dashboard. Now, on the dashboard, we want to start by creating the structure. I'm going to turn this here into divs, which are going to have first a div inside of it to represent the two different sections we're going to have here in the dashboard. The first section will just have an h1 tag saying your events to represent that it's your events that you're seeing, and then a p tag that will say something like this, like just explain what this page does. So track attendees, responses, and manage invite links. Then below this div, I want to add a button. Now, how are we going to add this button? To get a customizable button that already has some default styles, we're going to be using a component library. And the component library that I will use in this video is one of the most popular ones out there, which is shadcn. Now, to run shadcn, we're going to say npx shadcn at latest init. This will set up shadcn in your project. So what we want is to first select a component library. I would recommend choosing Radix. Base was just a recent one that was presented in the CLI. And then it's going to ask us for a preset. Then I'm going to choose Nova and I'm going to press Y, and it should set up shadcn on this project. When it's done, then we should be able to see the following. We should now see a components.json file over here. And also we should see a UI folder inside of our components. And by default, they add a button for us, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to render here this button from UI/button. And this is how it looks. Now, what do we want to put in this button? Well, first of all, I want to make it as child, and then inside of it I want to put a link which is going to say create event. Then this link is going to have an href to a new route called event new. Now we don't have that route yet, but we're going to create it. And when you click on this link, which is in the format of a button, it should take you there. Now, for now, we're going to keep it like this, and we're just going to continue moving. Now, the next thing that I want is I want to come down here, and this is where we're going to show the list of events. Now, we can add some styles in the meantime, so that this starts looking more presentable. We're going to set a display flex with a flex 1 and a direction of column for the parent div. Then on this div, we're going to wrap everything. Let me refresh this. We're going to center the items and justify in between so that this is on the left and this is on the right. Then I want to add some colors to the text. So for the your events, I'm going to add this. And for the second one, I'm going to put it kind of like a muted color so that it's not that apparent. And perfect. That's pretty much it. Now, what we want to do is we want to render a list of events. However, what I like to do in my videos is that before we list events, we need to have events in our tables, right? So we need to have the ability to create an event. So we're going to kind of leave this for now, and we're going to render this part of the app, which is the creating events part of the app. Now, to do that, we're going to have a new route system in our app. So I'm going to come here to the app folder and I'm going to create a new folder called events. Now in the events, we're going to have the individual event page, but we're also going to have the page to create an event. So we're going to start with the one to create the event. So since it's event/new, we have to create a new folder inside of the events, and I'll create a page.tsx. Now, how is this going to look like? Well, the page, we're going to export default async function, and we're going to create a new event page. Now, this page should return a div, and I'll just add the class names here. We're going to put a margin X of auto, width of full, and a max width of 2XL. By the way, I can go there now if I click create event. It is a route that exists, so I'm unsure. Wait, did we event? Oh, okay. We wrote this wrong on the dashboard content. We made event instead of events/new. So let's go back here, create event. It should have refreshed. Then I go create event, and it should take me to the correct route. Perfect. Now let's go back here. What I want to do is I want to actually start using some cards with some forms. Now those are all actual types from shadcn, components from shadcn that we should add. Now to add all of the components we're going to be using in this project, I'm going to paste the following command. To add any component you want to use from shadcn, literally you just run npx shadcn at latest add. Now I could have put them all next to each other, but I already had this command set up for me. You can technically just add all of them next to each other, because what it's going to do is it's going to add all of them individually here. But the idea here is that we want all of these components that we're going to be using in this project. But perfect, it's done. Let's close this up, and let's start by using a card. Now this card is gonna, we need to put stuff inside of it. We're gonna start by adding a card title, where we're gonna say create event. Perfect. Now let's see this. Perfect. Then we're going to put, actually, let's wrap a card header around this card title. Then below this card header, I'm going to add the card content. Then I'm going to put a form and a form field. Now I'll put a label inside of here, and it's going to say title, and then an input, which is going to be, it has an ID of title, because that's the title of the event you're trying to add. It's going to have a name of title. It's going to be required. And we're going to put a placeholder saying Tim Dinner, for example. Imagine that this is the event that you are setting up. Now, this is how it looks like. We're using a bunch of existing components so that we don't have to worry about styling. Now, this is how you add a form field. I'm going to add the other ones. We want there to also be a description, right? But the description will use a text area. Now, text area is just an input, but bigger, that you can also resize. Then we want the location field, and the location field will require us to put an input just like this. And finally, the datetime. But the datetime is a bit different because it's going to be an ID, like an input of a date type. So we also need to use a form message to say that this is optional. You can add that to your forms. And the important part here is to set the type of the input to be datetime local, so that you can put your datetime over here based on your local location. Finally, we want to add a div that is going to have the button to, let me just import, to create the event. Perfect. We also want to add another button, which is going to have a link inside of it to cancel. Now, linking basically will just take us back to the dashboard, which was where we were. The button here is going to be of type button. So I'll put here type button. But the reason for that is because this is a button inside of a form, and it's going to be type submit by default. So we're not going to do that. And I'm going to put a variant of outline so it looks a bit different from the first one, the primary. And because it's a link, it means that if I put an as child, it will act like a link. So I can click this and be brought back here, right? Now for this one, we want to submit the form. So the type of it is going to be submit. Perfect. Now there's just a bit of styling that we want to add to this bottom section over here, just to separate them a bit more. So I'm going to come here to this thing, and I'm going to put a gap of 3 in between them. Perfect. Now we have the form UI created. What do we want to do now? Well, we want to be able to create an event based on this. Now there's multiple ways in which you can create an event, but you might have noticed that we made this specifically into a server component, which is ideal because in Next.js, you want to make most of your website be server-side rendered to maximize the returns from SEO to the pace in which you load your app, and also the ability to get crawled by robots on search engines. Now, the thing is, to run some code when the user submits the form in a server-side rendered component, the best way to do this is by utilizing server actions. So how are we gonna create our server action? Well, the way we usually do it is we go into our lib folder over here, and we're going to create a folder called actions, where it's going to house all of our different server action. Now we're going to create one called events, which is going to be the server action file for all of the events. Now to make this into a server action file, I need to add the use server at the top. Now, which one do we want to create? Well, this is going to be where we interact with our databases in the server. Now, specifically, what I want to do here is I want to create a server action that is going to be called from this form, and it's going to be passed here. We're going to call it create event action. Then we're going to copy this, come here, and we're going to export an async function, create event action, pass in the form data, which is going to pass in automatically because we passed this into the action. And now we'll have access to it over here, and we can just import it. Now, what does this server action does? Well, first of all, we need to get the user ID. I can actually get the user ID really easily by, again, just getting this session and then setting it equal to a wait. And then I'm going to call the get session. Then I'm going to access the user ID by saying session.data.user.id. Then below this, we want to get the input of the form data. Now, what is the input? Basically, we want to parse how this form data is going to be returned, because the way this is returned doesn't match perfectly with the way we structured our tables. Remember that in our schema.prisma here, for a lot of fields, we named it one thing, but then we mapped it into something else by adding underscores and so on. So we kind of want to parse how we get the data from the form into a way that it will make sense to our database. So I'm going to create this parse create event function and then pass in the form data. Now, I'm not going to write this parse create event function. I'll just show you guys how I wrote it, just because it is just us going through each of them and checking to see the specific, getting the field from the form data and then returning it in a way that makes sense for how we want to store it in our table, including, for example, setting to null instead of undefined and so on. So we're going to get back this data from the create parse event, the parse create event function. And then over here, we're going to create a variable called created. And this variable is going to be what returns from the creation action. And to add a new event into our table, I can just run prisma.event. We need to import prisma.event, and it has access to the type of event because we ran the generate function or the generate command. And then we're going to access the event table, and we're going to call the create function. Now, this create function allows us to pass in the data that we want to add to the table. Now, how is this data going to look like? Well, it needs to look like our schema.prisma, right? So it needs to have a owner user ID, a title, a description, a location, and an event date. All of the ones that has a default, we don't need to pass because it defaults, like the created at will default to right now. So this is how it's going to look like. We're going to pass the user ID to the owner user ID. It's the person creating the event, the title from the input, the description, location, and the event date. Now, after we're done with this, I want to redirect the user. Now to redirect, we're going to import the redirect from Next navigation. Don't import the other one. And we want to redirect the user to the /events/ and then the specific event that we just created. Now, what does this mean? It means that we're going to create a page that is going to be for this specific event. It's the page that users who are invited for this event are going to be able to access, right? It will show what the event is like and how many people are going. Now, we don't have that page yet, but the way it's going to look like is it's going to be inside of the events route group, and it's going to take in an ID for the event you're trying to see. Now, after we create this new event, we're going to get back its data, including the ID. So I'm just redirecting the user directly to that page. So let's see if this works, right? I'm going to actually create a team dinner event. I'm going to send it to people. I'm just going to say dinner at fancy restaurant. Then location, I'm going to say 999 Jackson Street. I have no idea if that's a place. And I'm going to put Vancouver, Canada, just because that's where I live. Let's make it be on a Saturday. And then I'm going to click on create event. Boom. there's an issue. Now, I expected there to be issues, so I'm going to check here what happened. It says an unexpected response was received from the server. So what I want to do is actually, I'm going to wrap this around with a try and a catch. And let's see what is that unexpected response. So if there's an error, I want to console.error the error. And also I'm going to put this only if this was successful. Now, if it wasn't successful, I'm not going to do anything for now. I just want to see what that error is. So let's go back over here. I'm going to close this up and I'm going to put just literally whatever. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to click on create event. Okay, so actually the error is not here. It's on the proxy. Sorry about that. So the thing is, with server actions and the proxy that we have, server actions post request to the page URL, this middleware will actually break it. So instead, what we want to do is we want to create a function up here, which is going to check to see if this is a server action, and if it is it a post request? Now, the way we do this is by using this helper. Now, I wouldn't expect you to know how to write this. It's just because we're using a proxy and we don't want it to apply to our server actions. And then inside of here, before we do all of this logic, we're gonna check to see if it's a server action, and if it is, we're just gonna skip it. We're just gonna move forward, and that will allow us to get here. Now, you see the table is empty. If I were to add here, I'll refresh it actually. I'm gonna add team dinner again, restaurant, fancy. I don't want to, okay, I'll just leave it like that. 999 street. And then I'll put some date, click create event, and it seems to have worked. Now, there was an issue redirecting, but that's okay. Now, in the events table over here, if we refresh this, we should see that the event now exists. Now, the main issue with redirecting, I believe, is just that we don't have there's no place to redirect. We don't even have that file yet. But for now, we're gonna just assume that this works. Now, I'll go here to the dashboard, and we finally have a way to create events. So we also have a way to display them. So in the dashboard content, we can now get the event that we want to display. Now, how do we do that? Well, we have this table and we want to make a query to it to get the list of events. We can actually do that directly inside of our dashboard content because it is an async function. It's a server function or a server component. So I can come over here and I can fetch the events. But I'm actually going to call it rows. The result, I'm going to call it as rows because we actually need to do some manipulation, some parsing on the results to get the events that we want to display. Now, to get all of the events in the list, I'm going to say Prisma.event, and I need to, again, import Prisma event.find many. Now, I don't want to show all events that exist in our project. This is a personal dashboard. So I only want to find the events where the owner user ID equals the user ID, and that's why we got the user ID here. If you might have been questioning before, this is why. We also want to order the results based on the latest event, so when they were created at. I'll make it descending, and then I want to choose what parts of the event I want to get back. So you do that by adding the select. We technically only want their ID, so I'll set it to true. We only want the title, I'll set it to true. And then for the other ones, we want the event date, the location, and also the RSVPs. But this is something we're going to add later. It's a way for us to get data from two different tables at the same time, right? We're making a join to get the RSVPs from this event. Now, we don't have the RSVP information yet, so we're actually going to keep it like this. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to parse this. We're going to say events is equal to rows.map, get each event, and I'm going to map this event into the following structure. I want to put here an object that will have an ID, which is just the event ID, a title, which again is just the event title. But the difference is that the event date is going to be the event.event date, but if it's null, if it's true, we want to get that and use that toISOstring property, which is going to basically convert this into a readable date. And if not, we'll just set it to null. The location is just going to be the same thing, event.location. Now we have our events. We want to handle a case in which the events don't exist. So if you don't have a single event, we want to show like an empty case and a case in which it works. Now for the empty case, I'm just going to copy and paste since it's literally just an empty case. And also right now we won't see it because we do have an event. We probably should have just rendered this empty case first so that you guys could see. But the second part is going to be in case the event exists. Now let's go over here. It still doesn't show anything, but if I put something here, it should show because there's one event, so it will render this thing once. Now, what do we want to show here? Well, we want to loop through the list of events. So I'll say events.map, get each event. And for each event, I want to render not an object, but a card to represent the event. Now there's only one, so we'll just show one. Let me create a second one. I'm going to say this picnic with friends. I don't know. I won't put a description. The location is going to be Picnic Park, New York, US. I don't know. The date is going to be the 8th of April. I'll create the event. We should now have 2 events. So it shows 2 rows. Now, how do we want the events to look like? Well, first of all, we want to render this unique because this is React after all. So I want to make a unique identifier for each returnable item inside of this list so that React can properly organize the list when it's doing its reconciliation in the component lifecycle. Then I'm going to do card header, and I'm going to put a div in here with a card title, which is going to be the event title. And then below this, we're still going to add a button. But this button will be as child because it's actually going to be a link. It will just look like a button, but it will be a link. And it's going to link the user, I'm going to say open, to the individual event route, which again, we don't have it yet, but we can assume it's going to be on the events.event ID. It's going to be the ID of the event. Perfect. Now we're going to add some more styles, so don't worry about it, but we're going to close this div, and still in the header, we're going to put a div with a bunch of badge. Now, what is a badge? A badge will look like this, and that's to represent the different type of badges that we can add. The amount of people who are going to this event, the people who are maybe going to this event, and the people who are not going. Now, to represent that information, we're going to need the count for each of the badges. Now, we don't have those counts yet. It comes from the RSVP data. So I'm going to do this for now and just keep them over there, but we're going to later have to fill them in with actual data. Now, to finalize, I'm going to come here and I'm going to add a p tag, which is going to show the event date. So I'll say event.event date. And if the event date exists, I want to translate it into a readable string. If not, I'm going to say that no date was selected for this event, which to be honest, doesn't really make sense because why would you make an event without a date? And it should show something like this. On top of that, we want to do the exact same thing with the location. Below this, we're going to add the event location and put a hyphen if the event location exists. If not, we're just going to default it to nothing. Perfect. So now we have all of this. Now, where is the description? To be honest, this event doesn't have a lot of stuff. The description is the only other thing that we have. And since we already have an individual event screen, like an individual page for the event, I'm going to show more information there. Now let's add the styles. So the first thing I need to do is I need to come here to the div, and I need to make this into a grid because it's probably going to have multiple events, not just 2. So we're going to make this into a grid that accepts 2 columns if it's big enough, and 1 column, 2 columns if it's big enough, and 1 column if it's in a smaller screen. Then what I want to do is I'll come to this card header and I'm going to put a gap in a Y direction between them. To put a gap in between the items, I'm going to add actually this is going to be to the card header, a space Y of 3. So now there's a gap between all of them, but the first big div doesn't have that because it's inside of the div. So I'm going to apply a justify between to separate them because we don't need that. And then I'm going to put some styles just for the texts. Like I'll put here a text large for the title. I'm going to make the button, actually you can just put a size of small because I want to make it a lot smaller, and that should be good to go. Now for the different items here, for if you're going, the RSVPs, we're just going to do this and it should separate them. Now if it's, for example, if it has some values, later on, we're going to put the numbers to display. Now, this is pretty much it for the event screen. You can see it shows the different events. It just looks a bit odd because there aren't anyone RSVPing to them. However, that's going to be one of the next things we do. First, I do want to display the individual screen for the event because we've mentioned it a couple times already, and I want to be able to just test it and get it out of the way. So now let's start implementing the RSVP functionality. And to start things off, let's look at this. Now, why is this giving us a error. That's because when we created our schema over here, we didn't actually establish the full relationship between an event and an RSVP. We did that for an invite, but not for the RSVPs. So that means that on the RSVP over here, we are going to establish a relationship by utilizing the event ID and the invite ID. So we're going to create here that an RSVP has an event in which it's relation to, like it has a relationship to. So I'm going to create a relation here. It's going to be fields, and the field is going to be the event ID, and it will reference the ID of the event. The onDelete is going to be cascade, just like we did on the other one. I'm going to copy this and we're going to paste it again down here. But this time we're actually going to make a reference to the invite. So we're going to call this invite. We're going to change this to say event invite. And then the only thing we change is we change this to say invite ID. I feel like the ID, and then we're going to keep it just like this. That's fine. Now it gives us an error, and that's because we also have to establish the other side of the relationship. So on the invite, for example, we're going to have to establish that each invite can have a list of RSVPs, so an event RSVP array, and that should have getting rid of this, but let me just see. That's, oh yeah, because the onDelete property here with the invite ID, since it is optional, we can't use cascade. So I need to replace this with set null, which means that when we do delete an event invite, it is going to set the RSVP to null. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to come up here to the event, and we also want to add a list of RSVPs. So I'm going to come to the event and I'm going to put here a list of RSVPs. Now it should get rid of this, and for getting rid of this, because it is also going to be optional, we have to make the event invite also be optional. And that should pretty much be it. Now, since we made a change on our schema, we have to clear this off and we have to run the Prisma migration again. So let's see if, okay, there isn't anything there. So I'm just gonna run npx prisma migrate dev, name, we're gonna call it add relations. Now we're going to run this migration and we should see the changes appearing. Actually, it's not something that we can easily see by just looking at the table, but we're also going to do npx prisma generate. And this is what's going to get rid of the actual error over here, because you're going to generate the types with the correct relationships, and all of a sudden it's going to have the new type. And as you can see, we should get rid of the error. Now, what does this mean? Well, it doesn't really mean much. However, what we can do is we can at least display zeros for the RSVP values over here, because we don't have any none of the events have actual people RSVPing to them yet, but we can actually fill in the badge. Now, how are we going to fill in the badge? Well, we have the list of RSVPs, but that's not easy because we want to get that value from the table and then map it into numbers to get the actual count. So we're going to create a function up here that is going to be called count by status. So we want to get the RSVPs, and that's going to have a type of status, and we're going to make it into a type of Prisma RSVP status. Now, what is a Prisma RSVP status? Well, that's going to be a type we're going to import from the Prisma client. It's going to be import type, but it's going to be called RSVP status, and we're just going to change the name of it to say Prisma. I'll just copy this RSVP status, just so that we don't have any clashing with the actual RSVP status name. Now we're gonna get that, and we're gonna get an array of that. And what this function is gonna do is it's gonna count how many people are going for each type of RSVP. So we wanna know how many people are going. We're gonna create a counter that is gonna start at 0. We wanna also know how many people are maybe going and how many people are not going at all. Then we want to loop through the list of RSVPs. I'm going to use a for loop, but I'm going to use a kind of like a for each loop, where we're going to get the each RSVPs off the RSVPs list. And for each of them, we want to check if the status is equal to going, then I'm going to increment the going counts by 1. Simple logic. We'll do the same thing for the other ones, just like this, and increment those values. In the end, we want to return whatever the counts are. Now, what do we do with this function? Well, when we parse the results of the rows and we display them like this, we didn't really do anything for the RSVPs, but we don't have to worry about it because we can just destructure the result of this count by status function because it returns a going count, a maybe count, and a not going count. So I'm gonna get here the count by status, and I'm just gonna put the event.rsvps inside of it. And now, at least if we come down here to our badges, I can actually put values in them. It will all say 0, but still, I can say that going is gonna be going count, so it should say 0. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for all of these ones. I just need to remove this, and then I'll replace this. And I'm going to change this to say maybe, and then maybe going count, or maybe count. And then this one, I'm just going to say not going, and then replace this with the not going count. So it should all say 0. But how do we actually make it say, like, how do we actually get someone to RSVP to that? Well, like I said, before we do that, I want to just render the individual event page because I think that should be something quite easy for us to do based on what we've learned so far. And also, it was just going to get that out of the way. Now, the way we're going to do this is we want to display the event detail, right? Including its description and such. And we already know that it's going to be on this events route, but it's going to be a route that takes in the ID of the event to display that information. So we're going to make a dynamic route that takes in the event ID. And inside of here, we're going to render the page.tsx, and we're going to export default async function called event details page. Now, this will take in some props. It's going to take in the params, which is going to have of type params, which returns a promise with a event ID, which is a string. Then inside of this function, we're going to get back that event ID from the URL by resolving that promise. So params, and we're going to get that. Then we want to get the user information, like we did with the other page where we had the dashboard. Just get the session, just like this. We're going to import this function, and then we're going to return a component called event detail content, just like we did with the dashboard content. Now this one is going to take in two things: a user ID, which is going to be the session.user.data.user.id, and the event ID, which is going to be the event ID that we get from the params. Now for this actual page, I'm going to go a little bit faster just because a lot of the stuff that we did on this one is going to be similar to what we did with the dashboard content. We're going to create here the event detail content.esx. Then inside of here, we're going to export an async function called event detail content. It's going to take in a couple props, but just the ones that we defined. So it's going to take in a user ID, an event ID, and we're going to use that to actually display the correct information. Now, what I want to do is I'm just going to return a div for now. Now, to show anything on this screen, we need to get the actual data for that event, right? So we have the ID of the event, and we need to fetch more information, everything we need to know to display on this page for that event. So the way we do this is similar to the way we did for the previous page, where we're going to have to fetch information from Prisma. So I'm going to say const row is equal to await prisma.event. We do need to import Prisma, and we're going to find the first event. Instead of finding many, we're only going to find one of them. Now we want to find the event where the ID of the event is equal to the event ID. But also, we only want to show this information if the person logged in is the owner of the event. So if the owner ID is equal to the user ID, then if we do have that, we want to select a couple pieces of this data. Now, what do we want to select? Well, here's what I'm going to put. I'm going to get the ID of the event, the title, the description, the location, the date, and I also want to get information about the invite and the RSVPs. Now, if we don't find anything, so if nothing is returned, I'm going to put a not found, which is a new function from Next Navigation on Next 16, which basically just redirects us to a 404 not found page. So we're in an ID that actually has an event, right? Because I just redirected through that. But if I put something random here, you're going to see that I'm going to be redirected back to the not found. It did break for a second, but you see, it just says page could not load, something happened. So I'm going to go back over here and we're going to continue. Now we want to parse the results of this the same way how we did it on the dashboard content. Now we want to reuse this function that we have over here. So actually what I'm going to do is I might just export this function and I'll come back here and I want to reuse it. So I'm going to create here a counts variable and I'm going to call the count by status function. And I'm going to pass in the RSVPs or the row.RSVPs. Then we want to parse the event. I'm going to create a version of it over here. And the way we want to parse it is first, we want to keep the ID, the title, and the description and the location the same thing from what we get from the database. Then for the event date, I want to convert it into an ISO string so that we can get a real value when we display that is readable by humans. Then we want to actually get the invite token. Now, when I was creating the table, I didn't really explain much about what the invite token is going to be, but you're going to see when we do create the invites, it's going to be super necessary for us to create an invite in which a person is able to RSVP and we know which person did that. Now, finally, we want to keep track of the counts for RSVPs of who's going, who's maybe going, who's not going. So we're going to utilize that counts object to get those values. Then I want to come down here and we're going to start by displaying some information about the event. So I'm going to close this up a bit and we can start building. I'm going to add another div inside of here and another div just for the first section. This will be the header of the event. We're going to have an event.title. Then we're going to have a p tag with the description. But actually, before we put the description, we want to add the information about the event date and its location. So I'm going to show the event.event date, which, by the way, let me refresh this so we can see the data immediately. So, oh, I forgot to save this, but yeah, we're seeing the information, right? We just don't have any styles. Now for the event date, it's an ISO string. We want to convert it now to a local string by checking to see if the event date is not null. And if it's not null, I want to turn it into a date. So event.event date. In case there isn't anything, I'm just going to say no date selected. Now there is something, but we can't just use a date object. We have to convert this date object into a local string. And now we should be able to see like exactly when it is in a good format. Now we also want to add the location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check as well to see if the event dot location is valid. If not, I'm literally not going to put anything. I'll just put an empty object. If it is, then I want to put a hyphen over here and display the event.location. Perfect. Then below this is where we put the description, but the description is optional. So we need to check to see if it's valid. If it is, then we're going to put here a p tag with the event description. Perfect. Now this one didn't have a description, so let me actually go to one that has. Okay, yeah, I put restaurant fancy on this one. But yeah, so we know that's working. Now I do want to add a value for the or a button that allows us to go back in the screen. So I'm gonna go down this div, but still on this second div over here. We're gonna add a button with a link, which is gonna say back. And since we only get here from the dashboard, I'm gonna put an href that takes us back to the dashboard. Now this button has to be a child so that I can click on it and then go back and then click on it again and be able to see it. Perfect. Now below this, I'm gonna add the badges. Now we already kind of have that logic for badges. So I'll start by actually just adding the styles from the stuff that we've done so far so that we can start seeing it looking good. So for the overall div around everything, we're just gonna put a display flex, set it to be direction column and a gap of 6. Then we're gonna do this. We're gonna put a display flex with a justify in between so we separate the left side and the back button. Then we want to put some space in between these items. So we're going to add a class name here with a space y of 2. So there's a gap of 2 in between them. For the h1 tag, what we want to do is we want to make it be semi-bold and a little bit bigger. Then for the description, we want to just make it have a like a muted color and make it be a little bit smaller. Now for the back button, I'm actually not going to put a class. I'm just going to put a variant and I want to make it not look too prominent, so I'm gonna make it be a variant outline. Perfect. Now let's go to the badges for when the user when users RSVP to the event. So we're gonna add this div with the display flags and a gap in between the items of 2. And I'm actually gonna be using the badge component here, and I'm gonna be adding the same thing we did with the, oh no, not this one, the dashboard content. I might just even copy this just like that, and then come down here and just put it. Now it does, again, it doesn't show the correct values because, I mean, it shows the correct values, but it shows 0 because we don't have the ability to RSVP yet, but that's totally fine. Now, I also want to do something. So I made it secondary for all of them, but actually what I want to do is I want to change it. I want the first badge to just be a normal badge, be white, and the last one to be outlined. So they're all a bit different, just like that. I feel like it gives a better style. In fact, let's change this one as well to do that. Let's change this and then make this also be outline. I feel like it just makes it a little bit better. Now, the next thing is we want to add a card below this. Now, what card is this? This is going to be where we are able to first get the invite link to be able to share with our friends to invite them, and also then be able to see the attendees for this event. Now let's start with the invite link. We're going to put a card header with invite link as the main header tag. Below this, we're going to put the card content, and we're going to add a p tag that says share this link with guests so they can RSVP without creating an account, which is the main differentiator for this app that I wanted to do. You've seen this around, like when you share an event with people, you don't want them to have to create an account. That just, honestly, it makes people not go to your event. So that's the main idea here. Now, we don't have the invite URL yet, but I want to add a button here that is going to let us do that. So I'm going to add a form, and I'm going to add a button inside of it that is going to say generate link, just like that. Now, for the styles here, I want to put a gap in between all of the card contents. So I'm going to put a gap of 3. I also want to make this text over here have a muted color. And then for the button, I'm literally just going to make it be of type submit. And we're going to call an action when this happens. Now, what action are we going to call? Well, we're going to call it create invite action for event. Now, I know that name is huge, but you'll see why we're actually calling that. That's not the name of the action. That's just the name of the function we're going to be calling. Now, this function we're actually going to create here, and it is going to call a server action we're going to create called create invite link action. And the reason why we're making a separate function here and setting it equal to this is because when you create a server action, you can't pass data into it without having the data be part of the form, right? Now, for that to be the case, we would have to have, because when we create an invite, we're gonna need to know what the ID of the event is. For us to get that information in our server action, we'd have to have a field in our form that contains that data. But an easy way to bypass that is by using the bind function and then binding it with that value. So we're gonna pass the event ID directly here. Now, if you're not familiar with this, don't worry, it looks weird, I know, but that's what we need to do. And I'm gonna come over here to our events, and I'm gonna create our new server action, but it's gonna be called the create invite link action, and I'm gonna just import it so that it doesn't break. Now, what are we doing with this server action? Well, the first thing we want to do is we're not going to need any of this, but we're going to need to check to see if the user owns the event. So we're going to create a variable called owns, and we're going to await prisma.event.find first. And what we want to find is an event where the ID of the event is equal to the event ID we're going to get from this function. And because we binded it, now we can actually get the event ID directly from the arguments. So we want to check to see if we want to find the event in which the ID of the event is equal to the event ID, and the owner of that event is the user ID of the user signed in. Then we only want to get back the ID. If we get back the ID and it's not null, we know that the event exists and it is proper. Now, if no events are returned, we're just going to throw an error saying event not found. Now, here's the important part. When we generate a link, we want to use a random token to do this so that each event has a unique link to it. Now, what I want to do is I want to utilize the crypto package to do this. So I'm going to create here a token, set it equal to crypto dot, and then I'm going to call the random UUID function. And because this is going to go into our URL, we want to replace any forward slashes or any kind of characters that this random UUID is going to generate that impacts the URL. So we're going to replace all forward slashes and dashes and so on with just an empty string. Then we're going to await Prisma dot event invite, and we're going to add a event invite by adding the event invite where the event ID is equal to the event ID that we're trying to change. And we're going to create a new entry with the event ID and the token. Now, hear me out. I understand if this is confusing. If you look at our table here for event invites, an event invite includes an event ID, a token, and just the time in which it was created. So the important things here are the event ID and the token, right? The event ID will create the relationship to create the invite, and the token is the actual invite. It's what makes it unique. Now, why are we doing all this? Well, upsert is because we're actually going to allow the user to regenerate the link so that for some reason, if they want to regenerate a new link, they could. Now, upsert is a mix between insert and update. It basically inserts if there isn't anything there, and if there is something there, it updates. Now, we set what happens when we create in the case of inserting. Now, what do we want to do when we update? Well, we just want to update the token. That's the only thing we want to do it again. It's regenerate a new token if we want to change the link for some reason. Then when this is done, we should get back that information. Now, we're going to come back here to the event details. And here's the thing. We are passing this as an action here, and we can generate a link. Let's see if it works. We clicked on it. Let's come back here, refresh this. You see it did generate an event invite. Now, we don't see the link. How do we get the link if that is the case, right? We want to be able to get the link to send it to our friends. Now, to do that, here's what we need to do. We have the invite token directly here. Now, I want to utilize that to generate the URL. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create an invite URL variable. We're going to set it equal to the event.invite token. And if that's not null, then I want to create a URL, which is the process.env.next public app URL, and then default it to an empty string in case that doesn't exist. Now, what is the next public app URL? Well, it's the URL of our website, which we don't have right now as an environment variable. But since we're running on localhost 3000, we're going to add it over here. We're going to say localhost 3000. Now, the reason why we're making it into an environment variable is because we want to be able to change that value when we are obviously deployed and running on our own domain, so that this becomes your domain. Now, after that, we're going to put a slash here, invite slash event.invite token. Now, we don't have that route yet, but that's how it's going to generate it. Now, in case there isn't any invite token, we're just going to default that value to null. Now, we want to display the URL down here. So what I want to do is I want to check to see if the invite URL is proper. If it is, then I want to show something, show a div here. If not, I'm going to show a p tag that says no invite link generated yet. Now, this shouldn't show that because we did generate an invite link. But if I go back and then I go to this one, it should say no invite link generated yet. Now let's display the invite link for the team dinner. To do that, I'm going to first add here a bunch of classes for the URL to make it very distinct. And then I want to put inside of this div I'm just going to render the invite URL directly. Perfect. Now you can just come here and copy it just like this and then send it to your friends. Now, this is the localhost. So while we're testing in this video, it's going to be kind of weird. I'm just going to have to open it on like incognito or something so that we can go ahead and do RSVP to the invite. But for now, this should be fine. I also want to add a little bit of classes on the p tag over here. Perfect. Now, let's try to actually go ahead and do the invite. So I'm going to open up incognito. Right next to this. It's going to be kind of hard for us to see, but I'm going to open it up. And what I want to do is imagine I am a friend that just received this invite. So I go on this link, press enter, and boom, it doesn't even work. Why does it not work? Oh my God, I just realized we generated an HTTPS, not an HTTP. So the problem is with my .env over here, it should be HTTP because this is a local host. And let's see what else. I think that should be fine. Okay, let me copy this, go back here, and yeah, so I keep getting redirected to the sign-in, right? It's kind of broken for some reason, but I keep getting redirected to the sign-in. Now, why is that happening? Well, what's happening right now is the following. In our proxy, we always check to see if the user is signed in. Now, the way that proxies work in Next.js is that you can actually specify how you want to apply this, meaning that there are certain routes that might want to apply this proxy, and some of them you might not. The way you're going to do that is you're going to set here a export const config object, and you're going to pass a matcher, which is an array of different paths to routes in your app that you want to actually apply the proxy. So for example, any route on the dashboard should need to be authenticated to access. So I'm going to use the dashboard/path to be able to detect every route that is in the dashboard. Now the route that we want to go, it's an invite route, so it's not in the dashboard. We want to specify other ones as well, like the event one, which is the one we're right now. It should be accessible by like only accessible if you're authenticated, and we're gonna add more later on, but for now those are the only two. Now what happens is if I open up here Google Chrome and I try to copy this again, paste it here, what you should see is that we do get into the routes. Now there's some problems with the CSS here. I'm gonna see why that's happening. Oh, so this over here has dark and light mode because of shadcn. With shadcn adding a bunch of styles, we actually don't need a lot of them. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and replace the styles with the ones that we had before. Now to do that, we also have to replace our theme inline over here, and it should still look fine. Then for the body, we're gonna replace the body with the background color and all of the other agents. Now here's the thing: when you open your project on Incognito, it is going to be always defaulting to light mode. The reason for that is because Incognito has no cookies, which is where you store your theme. Now, that's fine actually because we force it to be dark mode on our code, but for the Neon UI, Neon Auth UI, it actually takes in that information. So what we want to do is go to our layouts and add a default theme to the Neon Auth provider as dark. And then this should make it such that the theme is always going to default to dark. Perfect. Now let's go back to this link. Why is it still light mode? Well, I believe it's because we don't have that page yet. So that's what we want to do. We want to create the invite route in our app. Well, for the invite route, we want to create here a folder called invite, then a folder inside of it called token. And inside of that folder, we're going to use the page.tsx. Now, we're going to use the token from the params to get the information of the invite. We're going to export default. In fact, I might just reuse the logic we have on the dashboard or the event details, right? This entire logic here, because it's pretty much going to be the same thing. I'm just going to change this to say invite page, and the params is going to send us a token. Also, I want to know if the user has submitted this to this event invite or not. So I'm actually also going to accept search params, which is something that we haven't done yet. Now, search params are going to be useful for us to keep a local state of our app in the URL, and keeping this as a server component. So we're going to get the token for the token of the invite, and then to get the information of whether or not the user has submitted their RSVP or not, I'm going to access these search params by getting a query. Finally, we don't need to get the session because again, this one, we don't need the session since the user doesn't have to be logged in. And we're going to create an invite RSVP content component that is going to take in the token and the submitted information from the search params. Now you're going to see how we're going to do this. But for the search params, we're gonna use numbers to determine if the user has submitted an RSVP or not. So now let's go and create this invite RSVP content component. We're gonna come to where we have our dashboard content, and we're gonna duplicate this. Then we're going to get the copy and we're going to change this to say invite RSVP content. We're going to change the name of this function. I'm going to just delete some of this stuff because we're not going to need it. And for the props here, we're going to get the token and the submitted state, which is going to be a Boolean of whether or not the user has submitted their RSVP or not. Then the reason why I copied all of that from the dashboard content is because a lot of this is going to be similar. So for example, we want to look to the event invite and try to get one row from it. We're going to find the first row in which the token from the URL matches. Now, what we want to include in that request is the following. I want to include the event information, and out of the event, I want to include the event ID, title, description, location, and event date. So the user should be able to see, in fact, I'm going to bring this over here. They should be able to see, which by the way, we just need to update this. Okay, refresh this. Is there an error? Oh, I didn't save this. There might be still errors just because there's a bunch of, there's a bunch of stuff here. I might just delete all of this. For now, let me just delete all of this so that we have a clean slate. And so you clearly see that it's in dark mode. It's not an issue. Perfect. So we got back the event invite from the token. We check to see if it got something back. If not, we just send the user to the not found. Then we want to get the event and through the row, and then from the event, we're going to parse the information, get the title, description, location, and event date. And with that, we want to display the information about the event. Now, it's going to be super similar to something we just did because we already have the screen, obviously, for when you want to see just the event. However, this is a bit different because this is for the user who isn't signed in and is trying to RSVP. But regardless of the fact, it's going to be a lot of the same that we just did. So I'm going to go a little bit faster with this. So we're going to start by adding a card and a card header with a class name of a space y of 3. Now inside of this, we're going to start by adding a badge for the RSVP, the title as a card title, and we're going to do the same thing we did with the other page where we show the date and the location with a little hyphen in between it. We're also going to display the description, same way as before. And then below the card header, we're going to add the card content. Now, what is going to go in that content? Well, it is actually going to go a form from UI form with a form field, which is going to include a label, which is going to be for the name. So you want to enter your name as a user who's trying to RSVP to this event. And we want to show an input to allow them to submit that. Now I want to import the input and it should look like this. I also want to add an HTML4 on the label so that it references that field. Now we want to do the same thing, but for the email of the user RSVP, we want to know their email. And then finally, I want to know the attendance. So I'm going to actually make a form field here that is going to have a radio button for the attendance. So if the user is going, not going, or maybe. So we're going to use here a select field inside of this form field, and it is going to have, it's going to be called status. It's required and it defaults to going, but you can click on it and change between maybe and not going. That's the kind of data that it's going to go. Now for each option, we just put the polling values and make sure to make them similar to the values that we used over here. So see, it kind of matches the actual schema. So now the user can choose that and submit. Now, how do we submit? They use the RSVP button at the bottom, submit RSVP. Now, in case the user has already submitted, we're going to come above this form, but still in the card content, and we're going to check to see if submitted is true. If yes, which I'll just default to true here, it will show something like this. Thanks, your RSVP has been recorded or updated. Perfect. But the thing is, submitted comes from the search param, and we're going to have to deal with that when we actually implement the server action. Now, what is a server action that is going to be called when we submit this form? So I'm going to put here an action, and we're going to create a server action called submit RSVP for token. Now we're going to require us to pass into the action the token. And the token is, again, not a field in the form. So for that to happen, we're going to use the bind function like we did previously, where we're going to create the actual server action called submit or update RSVP action and bind that to pass the token. Now let's go to where we create that action, which is going to be over here in the event action, and we can create this action. I'm going to copy the create event link, paste it here. Then we're going to change the name of this function. And obviously we require something like not just an event ID, we require a token. But the difference between this one and the previous one is that actually we do need some stuff from the form data as well, because this is a real form with other fields. So we also need to have access to the form data in this server action. Now, what else do we need here? Well, we need to parse the input from the form data. So I'm going to delete all of this here. And we'll start by getting the parse result and saying parse RSVP and passing the form data. Now, what is this parse RSVP function is going to look like? Well, it's similar to what we did here for the parse create event. It's just going to be validation. I'm going to paste it over here. What we're going to do, it's going to be a function that checks to see if it's a string, if it matches the amount of characters that we want. Now, hear me out. If you want to use something like yup or any other like Zod, you can go ahead and do that. I don't want to overcomplicate this because it's not the main focus. This is just a small part of it, but this is basically we're checking for each input. In fact, we also have this is RSVP status function, which just checks to see if it's part of the different statuses that we can have. So I'm gonna import here the different types, and I'll create here the RSVP statuses as an option. So you can either be going, maybe, or not going. And this function basically just checks to see if the status that we got back from the form matches that. Is this overcomplicating things? Maybe. It's just actually double checking to see if the form submitted is correct, so it doesn't break our tables. But I feel like when you're interacting with your database, you should always be aware of this. Now, the next thing I want to do after we parse that data is I want to fetch the invite by awaiting the Prisma.eventInvite.findFirst. And I want to look for the event where the token matches, and I only want to select the ID of the event and of the invite. And from the event, I also just want to select the ID. Now, why are we doing that? Because if you remember, one of the two things that we have on the table for the RSVP is we have the event ID and the invite ID. So we need to know both of those. So that's why we're fetching that information. Now, if we don't get back any invites, then we have to assume that there was an error, right? That invite link is invalid or something else. Now, if we do get something back, we want to get the event ID, and also we want to get the email from the form data. I want to normalize it by setting it to lowercase, because if you remember, that's an important part of the invite RSVP table. Now, below this, we want to do another upsert. So I'm going to say await prisma.event_RSVP.upserts. Now, I want to upsert and upsert where the event ID and email normalized field. Now, why is this one different? Why is it a connection of both of them? It's because if you remember in our schema, we defined them to be unique. So Prisma automatically creates this unique join of them so that it actually allows us to pass in the value for both of them. So I'll pass the event ID and the email normalized. Then, if that's the case for that field, I want to create the RSVP. Now, what data are we passing for the RSVP? We're passing the event ID, the invite ID, the name, the email, and the status. Now for the status, I want to set this to say RSVP status, and that should be good to go. Now, in case we want to do an update, so we want to update RSVP from maybe saying that we're going to saying we're not going, we want to also put the update field over here so that that's an option as well. But we have a little error here, and that's because we removed the default. So for the email normalized, so I'm just going to set email normalized, and it should remove the error. Now, when this is done, I want to redirect the user to the /invite/token, which is the same page the user is in, but I'm going to add the search paren saying that submitted is equal to 1. This is a way for us to have state-like behavior without having actual states, because this is not a client component. This is a server component. Now, let's see if this works. Let's come over here. I'm going to say I am Pedro. Actually, I'll say someone else. I'll say I'm jack@gmail.com, and I am going. Submit RSVP. Now it says, thank you for RSVP has been recorded or updated. So let's check to see if that's true. Let's go here, refresh this, and boom, it says that it's going. So it is working. Let me try again. I'm gonna copy this link. Since this is incognito, it doesn't remember me. I'm gonna say I'm Jessica, jessica@gmail.com, and I'm gonna say that I'm maybe going. Perfect. Now if I refresh this, it shows that information. So that's basically it for the RSVP behavior. You can send this link to people, they can see it, they don't need to create an account. If they were to go to like the dashboard, then they get redirected to a sign-in. But that idea that they can RSVP without that behavior, it's perfect and it's working. Now there is some more that we want to do in this app. We kind of want to create a list of attendees for a specific event. So you see here that, for example, the team dinner has two attendees, right? There's the one person that is going and one person that is maybe. I want to show a list below this that will indicate which is which. So below this card content that we have over here, I'm going to add a new card, and I'm going to add a card header with a card title, rendering the attendees list. Then let me just pull this out a little bit more. We're going to go ahead and create here below the card header, the card content. And we're going to first check to see if the RSVPs exist. Now, how are we going to get the RSVPs? Well, if we come up here, currently, we fetch for the event, right? We find a specific event and we create that event object over here. Now, with that information and the event ID, we also want to fetch for the RSVPs. So I'm going to create a RSVP rows here, and I'm going to await prisma.event_RSVP.findMany. Now, find many is going to look for many of this specific item that we're trying to fetch from our table, and we can specify what condition it is. We're going to get all of the RSVPs where they have an event ID equal to the current event ID that we're in, because then we're going to find all the RSVPs for this event. I also want to order it by when they were responded. So we have this responded at field, and I'm going to order it descending. Then I want to just select what we get back. Now, technically, you've seen me doing this a bunch of times, right, where I select the stuff. You don't have to, you can just get everything back. But by selecting the individual columns, we have more responsibility and more ownership over what we get back. And also we shrink the data to exactly what we need. It's better overall to have this as a practice. Then we're going to parse through the RSVPs and create this RSVPs array. So I'm going to get the RSVP row, I'm going to map it into a format that we like. Now, what is that format? Well, I want to make it into a ID, a name, an email, a status, and a responded at, which is going to be transformed into a readable version of it. Now, let's utilize this. First things first, what I mentioned here, we're going to check to see if the length is equal to 0. Because if it is, then we want to render some UI that is going to say something in the lines of no responses yet. If it's not 0, we're going to render something else. Now I'll put this empty fragment here. You see nothing shows up because there are RSVPs, but if you go to this one, which is empty, it should have said no responses yet. And it did. I just had to restart Next.js. Sorry about that. But if I go here, it says no responses yet. If I go this one, it doesn't show that, meaning that we have a response. Now, how are we going to display this response? Well, we're actually going to use the table component from our component folders. The first time we're using it, I'm going to create a table, and a table requires us to define a header and a body. For the header, we're going to define the different column headers. So to do that, we're going to have to use a table row and a table head for each of them. Now we're going to show the name of the user. Do we have to import this? Yeah, we're going to show the name of the user, the email, the status, and when they responded, or we're going to say it updated. So I'm going to say email, status, and updated. Perfect. Now, what we need to do is we need to show the table body below the table header. So I'm going to put a table body, and we're going to loop through the RSVPs and grab each RSVP and render a row per RSVP. So I'm going to say table row, and I'm going to render each row. Now, the row has to be composed of cells, and it has to have, each row has to have the same amount of cells as what we defined here as the columns. So the first cell is going to be for the name. So I'm going to say RSVP.name. Then we're going to have one for the email, one for the status, and one for the responded at. Now I'm not sure why it's saying that table head is not defined. I'm going to maybe just close this again and run it again. Let's see. Yeah, that worked. I don't know why Next.js sometimes has that stuff in development, but that's fine. So you see, we are showing information in this table. Now, obviously we don't want to show the name for all of the fields. So we're going to change this one to say email. And then for status, it will be a bit different because we actually want to show a badge. And this badge, we want to show it as a variant secondary. So it's not that apparent. It's like this. And then what we do inside is we're going to check for the RSVP status. So RSVP dot status. If it's equal to not going, then we're going to say not going. If not, we're just going to render the status. Now, why did we do that? Like, why didn't we just render the status for all of them? Well, because the other ones are a single word, right? And not going has an underscore. So that's why we had to specifically change on this one. But the other ones, you can just put the value, even though it's lowercase. I could uppercase the first character, but that's totally fine as well. Now, the last one is the date. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say new date. And for the new date, I want to grab the responded at and say to local date string. And we should get a date exactly of when this happened. Perfect. Now we're pretty much done with the core functionality of the website. Now, there's only a couple more things I want to do. So one of the things is, one of the really cool things we get directly and easily from Neon Auth is the fact that when I click on settings here, I can see all of my settings configuration page without really doing much. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that, how to create this account/settings path in our app. So to do that, we're going to come here to our app. We're going to create a folder, call it account. Then I'm going to create another folder like we did with the auth, and we're going to make it into a path. Now, inside of this, we're going to make the page.tsx. And what I want to do here is I want to export a default async function called account page. Then what I want to do is I want to make sure that this takes in the params so that we can get the params. So this will be of type params, which is of type promise, and it returns a path inside of this params. So path, which is equal to a string. Then inside of here, I want to return a component. Now I'm going to return a main tag just to apply some styling to it, but most of the styling is actually going to be from the account view component that comes directly from Neon Auth. And this is going to render all of this stuff for us. So this means that we can see information about the account and make changes to the account of the user based on the user logged in. Now, I do want to pass here the path from the params. So I'm going to get here the path, set it equal to await params, and I'm going to pass the path directly here, not as a string, but as an object. And now we have this account settings page. But there's one more thing I want to do. I want to add this function here, which is going to generate static params for us. And we need to import from Neon Auth the account view paths. And this is going to allow us to have access to the security over here where we can allow user to change their password and also see where the sessions of this user exist. So it's really interesting how much you can do with your authentication without really doing anything. I can actually change my name over here, Pedro Tech, I don't know, and then click save. And then this actually did save. Like if I go to the dashboard and I click here, now it's all here. Perfect. Now the final thing is just gonna be making the landing page. And for landing page, on my video, since it's just UI, I'm not gonna go over it, but I know how people like to have like the full website done when they watch a video like this. So what I do is I want you guys to just copy and paste the code that I'm going to paste here for the actual landing page. Obviously, we have to import all of these stuff over here at the top, but this is how the landing page looks. Now, you can make it look however you want. I just made the simple one, but the important part of the website is definitely this part over here where we have all this functionality for RSVPing, creating links, and so on. And now it is time for us to deploy this website. Now, to deploy this website, we have to first push this code into GitHub. So I created over here a repository. We're going to call this the Event Planner website. Now, this is where you're going to see the code for this video. And I'm going to click Create Repository. Then I'm going to copy all of this over here. And I'm going to come to this, to git init, and then git add dot, git commit. And I'm going to that already includes a commit. So I'm just going to paste what we copied from there. And we should see the code appearing here. Now, the reason why I'm going fast with this is because I already expect you to, know how to push code to GitHub. That's just a super basic thing that you learn in the beginning, but if you don't, this is how you do it. Then, now that we have our code over here, I want to go to Vercel. And in Vercel, I want you guys to create your Vercel account and link it to GitHub. If you don't have a Vercel account already, make sure to link it to GitHub, because then we're going to click on Add New Project. Then we're going to see our new repository appearing over here. I'm going to click on Import, and it's going to automatically import the code. Now, there's an important part to this, which is environment variables. We have to add here our environment variables so that the code actually works. So I'm going to copy all of this and I'm just going to paste it over here. Now, one of the environment variables won't work yet, which is the localhost 3000. That's for development and it only matters when we are in development. But we're actually going to create a new website here, and that new website is going to be deployed and it's going to have a new URL on Vercel. We're going to have to change this later, but the rest can remain the same. I'm going to click on deploy, and if everything is working, we should see the website live. Now, sometimes there are some issues, and I'm kind of always hoping that there are some issues, so I show you guys how to debug those issues. Perfect. So it seems like there was an error. The reason why this is an error is actually something that I always run into, and it's better that I show you why we have to do this by showing you it failing our deploy than to actually just do it and you guys don't get the context of what we're doing. So basically, when we generated our types here, we always ran npx Prisma generate, right? And it created this generated types. Now, this doesn't work in production. So what Prisma recommends is actually on our package.json, we have to go to our scripts and then add the following script. It's going to be post install, and we're going to, after install, we're going to run Prisma generate. So it will generate the types for us. And we're going to then push this. So I'm going to commit, fix, git push, and we should see the changes appearing over here soon. Perfect. And we can try redeploying. I'll click on the redeploy button and we'll see if any other errors appear. Perfect. As you can see, it finished deploying. I can see it's ready, and I can click on this visit over here. Now this is just for this specific commit. With Vercel, you can just go to any of them. I can click visit over here, and this is the actual URL of the website. So event planner website 5 Vercel app. Now this won't work because we do need to add our actual URL to our environment variables. So I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to come back here, then go to settings, then go to environment variables, and I'm going to change our public URL to say whatever the URL of that was. Now, previously we didn't add the slash, so don't add the slash or else it won't work. I'll save it and I'll click redeploy. That will make it such that with the redeploy, the new environment variables will be applied. So that's basically it. Now we have the entire website built and in production. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like down below, comment what you want to see next. Thank you so much, Neon, for sponsoring this video. I use them all the time. You've seen me using them in multiple videos, and I think they make everything a lot easier. I can't emphasize this enough, how much longer this project would have taken if we didn't use Neon, and specifically Neon Auth, because so many of the components and pages that we didn't have to build were built automatically for us by utilizing their new UI component library. So check them out. Click the link in the description. It will help support the channel. And again, yeah, thank you so much for sponsoring this video. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a like down below, comment what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys next time.